The first thing Claire Voss said to me that Saturday morning was, "I already put your boat down for 36 people, so please have it cleaned up by noon." She said it while standing on my dock in a white linen jacket, holding a clipboard like she had been sent by Congress instead of elected president of a neighborhood association with a tennis court and a monthly potluck. Behind her, my boat, the North Star, sat tied to the slip, with the lake shining around it, peaceful as a postcard, and I remember looking from her face to the boat and honestly wondering if I had missed some major event in my own life, like maybe I had died in my sleep and woken up in a world where strangers could reserve your property through a community newsletter. "Claire," I said, trying hard not to laugh, "you booked my boat for who?" She gave me that tight little smile she used whenever she believed she had already won something. "Residents of Willowmere Cove, we're trying to build community trust, Evan. The marina should not feel exclusive." Now, I had moved to Willowmere Cove 3 years earlier because I was tired of people who talked like that. I had spent 27 years doing turnaround work for companies that were always one bad quarter away from disaster. And by the time I sold my share of the firm, I wanted quiet mornings, a good cup of coffee, and a place where nobody needed a 5-slide presentation to explain why they were being unreasonable. Willowmere looked perfect at first. It was a small lake community about 40 minutes outside Knoxville, tucked between rolling hills and old pine woods, the kind of place where neighbors waved from golf carts and somebody always knew when your porch light burned out. My house sat on the east side of the lake, just above a small marina called Briar Point Landing, and after years of saving, planning, and talking myself out of it, I bought the North Star, a 54-foot cabin cruiser that was more boat than any sensible man needed. But that boat meant something to me. It was the first thing I had ever bought that was not meant to make money, impress a client, or fix somebody else's emergency. It was mine because I had worked for it, and because I wanted it. Claire, on the other hand, had a different view of ownership. In her mind, anything nice that existed within eyesight of Willowmere Cove was basically a community resource waiting to be properly redistributed by her and her little board of loyal friends. She had been HOA president for 6 years, which was long enough for people to stop questioning her and start arranging their lives around her moods. She fined people for trash cans left out too long, for bird feeders she claimed attracted unapproved wildlife, and once, unbelievably, for a front door painted what she called an emotionally disruptive shade of red. I stayed out of it. I paid my fees, kept my grass cut, and did not attend meetings. Then one afternoon, while checking some old property documents before replacing the dock lights, I discovered something interesting. Briar Point Landing did not belong to the HOA. It never had. The marina, the shoreline, the slips, and the small fueling station was still owned by the original developer's holding company, which had leased it to the HOA for a symbolic annual amount. A few phone calls later, I learned the developer wanted out, and before anyone at Willowmere knew what was happening, I'd bought the entire marina. I did not announce it because I had no reason to. The lease continued, the neighbors kept their boats there, and life stayed peaceful. Until Claire saw the North Star and decided my private boat would make a lovely attraction for her little kingdom. Standing on that dock, she looked at me as if I were the selfish one. "You will submit an availability schedule," she said, tapping her clipboard. "The board has already approved a shared access initiative." I looked down at the water, then back at her. "Claire, you do not get to vote your way into somebody else's boat." Her smile disappeared for half a second, and in that moment I saw it clearly. She did not want cooperation. She wanted surrender. I should have known then that Claire was not going to let it go, because people like her do not hear the word no as an answer. They hear it as a personal insult. 2 days later, I found a notice taped to my front door, printed on HOA letterhead in that cheerful blue font they used for bake sale reminders and pool closing dates. It said I was required to register the North Star in the new Willowmere Shared Marina portal by Friday, and that residents could reserve unused vessels with 48 hours' notice. At the bottom, in bold, it said failure to comply may result in daily fines. I stood there holding that paper in one hand and my coffee in the other, staring at the lake like it might explain how I'd ended up in a neighborhood where a woman with a clipboard thought she could turn my boat into a timeshare. I called Claire because I still believed, maybe foolishly, that if I spoke to her calmly enough, she would realize how ridiculous this was. She answered on the second ring. "Evan, I was hoping you would call." "Claire," I said, "you might want to check your records before you start assigning my boat to people. The North Star is private property." There was a pause, the kind that is never really silence because you can almost hear a person deciding how much condescension to use. Then she said, "All waterfront assets inside Willowmere fall under community oversight." No, they do not. They do when they affect community access. That is not a legal sentence, Claire. Her voice sharpened. You bought into a community, Evan. You do not get to pick and choose which rules apply to you. I looked out at the North Star rocking gently in its slip, and I could feel the old part of me waking up, the part that used to sit through hostile board meetings and wait for people to make the mistake of underestimating him. "You are right about one thing," I said. "I do not get to pick which rules apply to me. Neither do you." Then I hung up and called my attorney, Marcus Hale, a guy I had known since college who had the patience of a saint and the humor of a man who had seen too many grown adults fight over fences. I explained everything, including the shared marina portal, the fines, and Claire's confidence that an HOA vote could somehow override a county deed. Marcus laughed so hard I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Then he said, "Evan, do not give her a schedule. Do not sign anything. Save every email, every notice, every text, and do not let anybody on that dock without your permission." I asked if I should send the legal letter. "Yes," he said, "but write it like you were giving her a map away from a cliff. Clear, polite, and impossible to misunderstand." So that night, I wrote one. I told the board that Briar Point Landing, including its marina facilities, slips, shoreline, and dock structures, was privately owned by me. I explained that their lease did not grant them ownership, that the North Star was never part of any HOA asset, and that any attempt to access it or authorize others to do so would be treated as trespass. I did not insult anyone. I did not threaten anybody. I simply stated facts, which was apparently the most offensive thing I could have done. By the next morning, Claire had forwarded my letter to half the neighborhood with a message that said, "It is disappointing when certain residents place personal luxury above the spirit of our community." That was when things started to get ugly. At first, it was litty things. Jeff Maddox, who lived 2 streets over and owned a jet ski with a louder engine than good sense, stopped waving at me. A woman named Laurie, who had once brought me cookies when I moved in, told me, "Claire said I was trying to privatize the lake." I asked Laurie if she'd ever seen me block anyone from the water. She looked embarrassed, mumbled something about not wanting to get involved, and hurried back to her golf cart. Then came the HOA meeting. I'd avoided those meetings for 3 years, but that Thursday night I put on a clean shirt, grabbed my folder of documents, and walked into the clubhouse. The room was packed. Claire stood at the front beside a projector screen, her board members sitting behind her in matching expressions of moral concern. On the screen was a photo of the North Star taken from the shoreline, glowing in the late afternoon sun like something from a travel ad. Above it were the words, "Shared Marina Initiative." Claire began with her soft voice, the one she used when she wanted to sound reasonable before saying something completely insane. "Willowmere Cove has always been built on mutual respect," she said, spreading her hands toward the room. "But recently, we have seen behavior that threatens the fair use of our shared waterfront resources." I could feel every head turn toward me, and for a second I wanted to stand up and walk out, not because I was scared, but because I was scared, but because I was tired. I had come to this place to be done with fighting. I had come here because I thought peace was something you could buy if you worked hard enough. But peace, I was learning, has less to do with where you live than with who believes they have the right to disturb it. Claire clicked to the next slide. It showed smiling families on boats, none of them mine. "This initiative would allow residents to reserve unused vessels," she said. "We all benefit. No one is excluded." I raised my hand. She looked at me with a smile that was almost daring me to make a scene. "Yes, Evan, you are proposing that people use private property without the owner's consent." A few people shifted in their chairs. Claire tilted her head. "We are proposing shared access." "No," I said, keeping my voice level. "You are proposing theft with a newsletter." That got a reaction. Somebody near the back actually laughed, then quickly stopped when Claire looked over. She smiled at me, but there was no warmth in it. "You chose to live in a community, Evan." I held up the folder in my lap. "And you chose not to read the county records." For the first time that night, her face changed. Just a flicker, barely a second. But I saw it. She had not checked. She had spent weeks telling everyone the marina belonged to the HOA because she believed it should, and in Claire's world, that was usually enough. I stood and walked to the front, placing copies of the deed and purchase agreement on the table. Briar Point Landing is mine, I said. The HOA has a lease, that is all. And if anyone here thinks a vote gives them the right to board my boat, I would strongly suggest you talk to a lawyer before you talk to Claire. The room went quiet, but not in the way I had hoped, not the quiet of people understanding. It was the quiet of people waiting to see who would win. Claire looked down at the papers, then back at the crowd. "We will review these claims," she said, "but in the meantime the board will proceed with the vote." That was the moment I understood the real problem. Claire did not need the facts to be on her side. She only needed enough people to be afraid of being the next person she targeted. The vote passed, 61 to 29. By the time I got home, there was another email in my inbox. Subject line, "Notice of non-compliance. Beginning Monday. I would be fined $500 a day until I register the North Star for community use." I read it twice, folded my hands on the kitchen counter and laughed once, quietly, because sometimes the only thing left to do when somebody declares war on your peace is decide whether they have any idea what they just started. Monday morning came bright and calm, which felt almost insulting considering what was about to happen. I was standing on my porch with a cup of coffee when I heard music drifting across the water. Not the soft kind from somebody grilling on their deck, but loud bass and cheerful voices coming from Briar Point Landing. I looked down toward the marina and saw folding tables, coolers, balloons tied to my railings, and a crowd gathering around the North Star like it was the grand opening of a public attraction. Claire stood in the middle of it all, wearing a pale blue dress, sunglasses, and that same clipboard tucked under one arm. She had somehow turned my refusal into an event. A hand-painted sign near the gate read, "Willowmere Community Lake Day," and beneath it, in smaller letters, "Boarding begins at noon." For a few seconds, I just stood there, coffee in hand, watching two teenagers tug at the lock on my boat gate while Claire greeted people like a cruise director. Then, something inside me went quiet. Not angry quiet, clear quiet. I set my coffee down, grabbed the folder Marcus had told me to keep close, and walked down the hill. The closer I got, the more people noticed me. Conversations faded. Claire turned with a wide smile. "Evan," she said, like I'd arrived late to my own birthday party, "you made it. I was beginning to think you would be difficult." I stopped a few feet from her. "Claire, tell everyone to leave my dock." Her smile held, but only barely. "This is a board-approved community event. On private property. On shared waterfront property," she corrected. I looked at the families standing behind her, some holding beach bags, some looking uncertain now that I was there. "Folks," I said loud enough for everyone to hear, "you were told this marina belongs to the HOA. It does not. You were told you could board my boat. You cannot. I am asking you once to leave." Claire stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Do not embarrass yourself, Evan. You will look like a selfish old man calling the police on his neighbors." I pulled out my phone. "Then I guess you should start packing up before they get here." She laughed, but it sounded thin. I called the county sheriff's office, reported 40 trespassers and attempted forced entry onto my boat, then stood there while the music died and the mood changed. 20 minutes later, 2 deputies came through the marina gate. Claire rushed toward them with her HOA badge in hand, talking fast, smiling too much, explaining that this was only a civil dispute. Deputy Nolan, a broad-shouldered man with tired eyes, listened to her for about 10 seconds before turning to me. I handed him the deed, the marina purchase agreement, the lease records, and photographs of the cut lock. He read through the pages while the whole crowd watched. Finally, he looked at Claire and said, "Ma'am, these records show Mr. Carter owns this marina and the dock. HOA rules do not override county property records. You and your guests need to leave." Claire stared at him. "That cannot be right." "It is right enough for today," he said. "And if that lock was cut, we may be discussing criminal damage too." That was when the crowd broke apart. Parents gathered their kids. Somebody quietly unplugged the speakers. A man carrying a tray of burgers looked like he wanted to disappear into the lake. Claire stood there until almost everyone had left, her face pale behind those sunglasses. Before she walked away, she leaned close and whispered, "You have made an enemy out of this community." I looked at the balloons twisting against my dock rail and said, "No, Claire, you did that when you lied to them." For the next week, she tried everything. More fines, more emails, more accusations that I was destroying Willowmere. But the spell had broken. People had seen the sheriff remove her from a property she claimed was theirs. They had watched her confidence collapse the second real documents appeared. Marcus sent a formal notice terminating the HOA lease for the marina because of repeated trespass, harassment, and property damage. Then he filed suit against the HOA and Claire personally. At the emergency board meeting 2 weeks later, I brought the same folder, plus security footage showing Claire's son and 2 friends trying to pry open the engine compartment on the North Star after midnight. When the video played, the room went silent in a way it had never been silent before. Not afraid. Ashamed. By the end of that meeting, the board voted Claire out by a margin so large nobody even bothered recounting it. The new board settled the lawsuit, issued a public apology, and agreed in writing that Briar Point Landing belonged to me, permanently and without debate. A month later, I reopened several slips for reasonable monthly rentals because most of the people in Willowmere were not bad people. They had just been afraid of the loudest person in the room. Claire eventually sold her house and left without a goodbye. These days, I still take the North Star out at sunset, and sometimes I see neighbors waving from their docks. I wave back. But every now and then, when the lake gets quiet, I think about how close I came to giving in just to avoid conflict. So tell me this. What would you have done in my place? Would you have reopened the marina for the community, or would you have locked the gates for good after everything Claire put me through? Leave your answer in the comments, because I'm still not sure there is one right answer.